Would you introduce yourself for us, please?
Yes, hi, my name is Carlo Niño, former graduate of St. Mary's University. I'm one of the alumni, graduated in 1996 with an undergraduate in international relations, and I have a master's degree from the same university from Dr. Hufford in international relations as well.
So describe what you are currently doing in the professional world, Carlo.
Well, several different things simultaneously. It's an interesting question, and it's quite diverse. Trying to do my best at multitasking, to be sure. I would say that in my current role, I'm doing a lot of capacity building, resilience building, partnership building within the country of Uganda at this moment. Actually, not very far from the mouth of the Nile on Lake Victoria itself. So interesting times.
And can you describe the nature of your work? What are some of the tasks that are involved in your day-to-day efforts?
So a lot of the things that I have to do is be versatile in terms of what my role calls for. And I think that's something that a lot of people can use or parlay into anything that they're doing or that they want to do. You hear a lot of buzzwords like stovepipes or stay in your lane. But to be sure, a lot of the most important achievements involved in project management or process management is understanding a lot about what your role is and where you fit in the overall scheme of things. So necessarily that means I have to look at what components exist to my left, what components exist to my right. And in practical terms, here in Uganda, I have to be aware of who several of my partners are. And that involves a lot of stakeholder management, a lot of stakeholder ownership, understanding who the players are, what their values and what their roles are in regards to the projects, and implementing from there. But it's making sure that you get everybody involved on the same sheet of music, and that means keeping you pretty busy.
What do you like most about your work, Carlo?
You know, it's funny because a lot of the projects I'm on, I can't say that two are alike, but what many of them have in common is there is no one standard way of doing things. I have to be a kind of a trailblazer and go out and be a little bit innovative. And I know that that term gets thrown around a lot, but you do have to improvise quite a bit. And that means when you're the first person, man, woman, what have you, on the ground, no one is going to be holding your hand. No one's going to give you a turnover binder. No one's going to tell you how to do it, especially in my particular role. And that means I get to somehow invent the role, reinvent the role, and then put my signature at the bottom. So what I enjoy is a great deal of professional autonomy and trust. And there's a lot of professionalism that's involved in my community. So I enjoy that tremendously.
What are some of the aspects of your work that you like least?
Some of the aspects that I like the least is sometimes my availability or flexibility to return back to the United States when people want to reach out to me for their birthdays, their weddings, life cycle events. It's like being thrown in a time warp and you're on the other side of the solar system or the other side of the galaxy, and you come back and children have grown up, people have gotten married, they've gotten engaged, life moves on, and sometimes that can be a bittersweet challenge, but it's part of the sacrifices. So that's one of the things that sometimes is a bit of a challenge. Yeah.
So thinking back, what was your first job and how did you obtain that role?
You know, I have to answer this in two different ways, or at least 2.5 different kind of ways. My very, very first job was actually a lifeguard working at a public swimming pool in San Antonio, Texas. I was working at Concepcion public swimming pool. That was my very, very, very first job. But then if we look at my two first jobs, my first job was then working as a second lieutenant, a commissioned second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And thank you for being the kind of American that's willing to fight and die for it. Appreciate that very much. The other thing is that when I left the Marine Corps in 2009, I then had to look for a civilian career. And this was interesting because we had just been going through the beginning of the real estate mortgage crisis in 2008, 2009. And this goes out to anybody that's out there that's struggling or wondering exactly how they're going to make it. I was a major in the United States Marine Corps when I got out. I had a couple of master's degrees. One was from Naval Postgraduate School. Another one was, of course, from St. Mary's. Several professional certifications. I could think to myself, like, why wouldn't I be hired? You know, and it was a struggle because there were a lot of people who were working professionally in the civilian industry for 20, 25, 30 years, and they were a lot more competitive than I was on paper. So I knew some colleagues that I had met in Washington, D.C. at a wedding reception. And they introduced me to a NGO, a development company. And they said, well, Carlo, until you have things all figured out, why don't you go and work as an NGO director, a provincial stability director in Farah, Afghanistan, just south of Herat, somewhere near the border of Iran. So I said, okay, sure, I can do that. I've been going in and out of Afghanistan several times already as an officer, so now I can do it as a civilian. But now we're going to be doing humanitarian aid efforts, working with UNDP, UNICEF, World Health Organization, World Food Program. And it was an interesting experience, but that was my very first civilian job. Prior to that, the only thing I had on my resume was lifeguard. But of course, military helped a little bit there, so.
How would you describe your career journey? How you progressed from lifeguard to the military to Afghanistan to where you are today in Uganda?
You know,
How did you progress from that first job to your current role?
You know, it's interesting you asked that. I look back in the year 2006, and I went to Tanzania to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I made it to the top. Yay!
Yay.
But what was interesting was I was in no kind of physical health, whether I was a Marine or not, to be just jumping on top of a mountain and reaching its summit. I realized somewhere near the top that I was doing more of a stumbling and falling on the ground. But yet I would say this as something as a metaphor, that every time I was stumbling and every time I was falling forward and I was falling upward until I reached the top. So I was tripping and falling. I was gasping for breath. I was like doing every single thing that was possibly wrong, I'm sure. But I kept moving in the same trajectory that allowed me to reach the summit. And that to me was one of my personal achievements, a great personal achievement. And how I answer your question is that when I didn't have a plan, I didn't have everything journeyed out. I didn't have everything mapped out whatsoever. So I think that what I did, and this is what my father did, was I looked for a strong mentor. I looked for an example that, for me, I considered to be successful. That was several Marine officers. That was my father. There was family that was involved, my uncle as well, other people in my family. And I thought to myself, well, you know, I can go in the military. I can do what I need to do out there. And eventually I felt that I would somehow look good on paper. But I think ultimately what I learned was a lot more about myself. And I learned what it would take to stick out to difficulties. I learned what it would take to lead people, which is just because you've got the rank doesn't mean you've got the ability to just tell people what to do. You know, you have to use a lot of peer leadership to try to encourage and inspire people to want to follow you. So I think that the journey as it took place was one where I used a lot of mentors and one where I used a large degree of introspection to look and see the things that I did wrong and how I could do them better the next time. And that helped me reach out for greater challenges that lay in front of me. And I'll say this also, and this is without any small, what I thought was interesting, and I will have to admit this, is that I always aimed for the deep side of the pool. And what I mean by that is that when I applied for any position, I never applied for a position that I thought that perhaps maybe, you know, I'm just okay in, or I'm a good fit for that. I always applied for positions that were out of my comfort zone. I applied for positions that were beyond every man's reach should exceed his grasp, kind of a concept. And I would get in, And I felt, look, as long as I get in there and I talk to the recruiters and I speak to my managers, and then I'm not trying to game anybody or what have you, but I made it past the first recruitment challenges and hurdles. They would say, okay, you know what? Maybe he needs some OJT, some on-the-job training. Maybe he needs some certifications in something. But I always gave it my level best, and I would honestly say that as long as my heart was in it, everything else followed after that. So that's basically was kind of my compass in following the path that led me to where I am today.
So can you describe any pivotal moments in your career journey, and especially ones that just changed the trajectory of your career path? How did you choose what path to take when you were presented with those perhaps pivotal moments?
I know I reference the military a lot, especially the Marine Corps, and one of the things that they instill upon all of its members is leadership, and it's leadership that's also not just defined in terms of courage or courageous leadership, but also moral integrity. And basically what I think is important to acknowledge here is that there are a lot of things that we sign up to do, whatever that is, and we have one image or impression of what that is, and then there's an actual way that some things are. And I think the two pivotal moments that I would like to point to first was when I joined the Marine Corps. I was very much a Captain America kind of a person that was, always doing a certain kind of a standard that I wanted to follow and achieve. And then I think that I went into Afghanistan in 2001 on November 26th with the initial wave with the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit with General Mattis off the USS Peleliu and everything. And that was my first experience touching war and seeing what actual combat looked and felt like. And I think that it modified and changed a lot of my world views on things. And that encouraged me then in 2005, when I was working in the Pentagon, to volunteer for a job in West Africa in Liberia for the United Nations. It was a UN mission in Liberia, and it was a Chapter 6 mission. The reason why I call it a Chapter 6 mission is because a Chapter 6 mission is an unarmed mission, whereas a Chapter 7 mission is an armed mission. And the reason why that's different and why that's important to highlight here is because up until this point, I had gotten used to having a firearm on me and being able to go about my daily life with a firearm and all that implies. But when I was in Liberia in 2005, I didn't have that firearm with me, and I had to still achieve results without the benefit of a coercive mechanism. And I then began to realize the importance of American soft power and exactly how influential and important that was. And when I realized what kind of earnest and real gains I could make without the use of that threat of a coercive mechanism, I found that the results were that much more authentic and much more long-lasting. So I think that the second one with Liberia definitely sent me off on the trajectory where my colleagues that worked in the development community reached out to me and said, we need people like you. We need people that like you that understand both sides, that have had a foot in each world, the civil world and the military world, and some people call it the civ mil. And sometimes I consider myself to be something of the hyphen between the civ and the mil. So I'm able to try to liaise and talk both languages to both communities so that they both can kind of sit at the table and explain a little bit about both of what they're both trying to achieve. And oftentimes they're both trying to do the same thing, but they sometimes talk a little bit past each other. And you just need a little bit somebody that's in there and say, wait, hold up, guys. We're all the same team, same fight, and we can all make it together. So I think that definitely the military world and both the civ mil world helped me get to the place that I'm at today, definitely.
So can you elaborate how roles that you had early in your career prepared you for those future roles, whether roles that were further in your career or the current role that you have today?
I'll tell you this for a fact, especially with this one right now, the one that I had today. I thought when I was talking to several of the people that were interested in having me on this project, I thought they would be more interested in talking about Ebola or the counterinsurgency projects in Afghanistan, or the international narcotics and logistics projects in Haiti, or the anti-piracy projects in Djibouti. But I think that the ones that they asked me about the most were the early, less sexy jobs when I was a second lieutenant, when I was just when I was a boot. They wanted to know what was my fundamental grasp of the basics. They wanted to understand where I started from. And I want to highlight that because I think that a lot of times, if a person doesn't have the vision to see where they may or may not be tomorrow, they might sell themselves short in thinking that the kind of roles that they're acting on today are mundane or menial. It adds up. It adds up. And I'm telling you, as I'm sitting right here in front of you outside of Lake Victoria, that I wasn't hired on the gains of everything that was in Afghanistan. I was hired for all the stuff that I was doing in a warehouse in Nowheresville out in California in some random location. That's what they wanted to know. And that's what I gave them. So definitely that was something I was not prepared for, not something I was expecting. And I really had to kind of peel back the memories and think about, what I was doing and what was important back then, and then try to get inside and crawl inside of the question to understand from their perspective why some of those things were their priorities. So, yeah.
What particular knowledge, skills, and abilities have contributed to your success in your professional life?
As far as knowledge is concerned, there's a lot of technical knowledge that's out there, and it's always going to be out there. And they'll tell you this, as they'll tell anybody in school. It's not important what you know as long as you know where to go and find it. But I would add one more on top of that. A lot of it is also those people that are within your network, those people that are within your community that also have that experience, have that knowledge, and build those relationships and cultivate those relationships so that if and when you need them, they're way better than Google. They're way better than Wikipedia. And that's just something that ties back to my earlier comments related to mentorship. As far as the skills are concerned, this one is kind of a je ne sais quoi. This one is a sort of an X quotient, meaning that that relied on a lot of creativity and a lot of improvisation. As far as skills are concerned, I had to learn how to adapt and basically figure out a solution when I was on the ground when there was no clear solution. And I'll circle back around to that one later. And as far as what I had to do in terms of like my learning and everything else after that, I would definitely say that having a sense of humor is vastly important. You're gonna have to be able to laugh at yourself, sit down after a long, hard, frustrating day and just say, you know what, I'm doing everything that I can. I'm doing the best that I can. I can laugh at myself. I made a big mistake out there, but you know what? I'm going to dust myself off, pick myself up, and go back out there and do it again, But I think that comes with a large dose of humility. And again, it comes back with some introspection and being able to separate yourself from ego and pride, because we've all been there. I'm the great Carlo Niño. Why isn't everybody acknowledging my accomplishments and hey, sometimes you just got to leave it at home and you just got to come in and say, listen, I don't know how this works. And I don't know how these things happen or how these things teach me, and people, when they see that matter of factness coming from you, and not in a patronizing way, not in a condescending way, but in an authentic way where you're truly respecting other people that might be your colleagues, that might be your subordinates, and say, help me so that I can help the organization. And that's a good part of servant leadership, I'd have to say. So those would be my three biggest takeaways.
Great. So how do you pursue professional development opportunities, whether that's through your employer or through other outside organizations?
Interesting. Again, I know I keep beating this drum quite a bit, but I keep going back to my mentors. And here's what I do. I look at what my mentors did. And this a great example would be Dr. Hufford at St. Mary's University. I reference him all the time. Okay. But I'm not Dr. Hufford, am I? I'll never be Dr. Hufford. There's only ever going to be one Dr. Hufford, just as there's going to be just one Carlo Niño. So the best that I can do is what worked for Dr. Hufford? Where did he succeed? And then I take that and then I make it my own thing. I make it my own Carlo Niño-ism. So I'm not going to graduate from the London School of Economics. So I graduated from the Naval Postgraduate School. But I look and find out what were his influences. And that just doesn't have to be somebody from St. Mary's University. That can be a historical figure, reading books, reading biographies, finding out exactly how did they do it. And it's not going to be a one-for-one. It's going to have to be tailor-made, specific to you, because everybody is proceeding from their own original experience and their own individual context. And saying, like, I'll never be as good as this person is already cutting one person's self short. So I would definitely say that I have in my mind those kinds of things that I think would better shape and lens and focus my experience in such a way that I can be a better leader, or I can be a better project manager, or I can be a better implementer or facilitator, whatever that is. And I find out, where's there a course on this? Where is there a course on financial management, on grants and cooperative agreements, on the PMP and project management, on any of these things that are out there? And dollars to donuts, you're going to find them. Just go to Uncle Google, look up project management, and you're going to find a slew of those things. Find your perfect one that fits for you, and then just make it sing. And then that's the best that anyone can ask for.
Yeah. Describe how you balance your professional and personal life.
So I was thinking about this one for a long time, and what I want to give back to anybody else is, if they ever figure this one out, then please let me know, because as anyone can see, I'm living and working in Uganda. I've been living and working in Bangladesh for 3 years. I was doing the same thing in Haiti. So then where do you find the time to roll in the other things that are your personal time off? And there are a lot of fantastic organizations out there that'll give you a lot of words of advice and wisdom on this. And one of them is something called you could look at it as the gauge rule, where you're looking at 8 hours for work, 8 hours for family, and 8 hours for yourself, and you can break up your 24-hour period of time looking at it that way. But as we all know, life isn't like that. It isn't where it stops at 5 o'clock and personal life starts at 5:01. It doesn't play out that way ever. So sometimes it's 6 hours for one and 10 hours of the other. But I think that what I try to do is I look away from what I think a lot of society considers to be traditional definitions of personal life. So sometimes I'm playing with a cat. Sometimes I go jogging. Sometimes I start playing the piano, or sometimes I engage with some artists out in town. And interestingly enough, I'll find through a lot of oblique strategies, a lot of lateral thinking, a lot of answers for work start cropping up in some of the non-traditional things that I'm doing also out in town. You just need to take a break from it. You can't spend your time at work constantly worrying. You got to go out, eat some apple pie at a diner, take your mind off of it, go read a book or whatever, but don't think anything about work whatsoever. And then sure enough, like an egg out of a chicken, that answer is going to come out of you like thunderclap, and you're going to be like, wow. And I'm telling you right now, that's oblique strategies. They work, not maybe all the time, but you got to make that time for yourself.
What's the best piece of career advice that you've ever received, and where did it come from?
This is an interesting one. When I was getting out of the military, I was trying to rely on the officer and military mafia to try to help me get a job with Lockheed or Northrop Grumman or one of these big defense industry things. And interestingly enough, I ran into something of a frenemy, adversary, competitor. And I was humble, and I asked him, I said, hey, do you think you could, he was working at one of these industries. And I said, do you think you could put in a word for me, or you could talk to a hiring manager and try to pull me in? And, he was being how he was, standoffish, and he was kind of laughing at my situation. And he kind of made this joke, like while he was chomping on an apple, being very, into himself. And he said, Carlo, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And then that was it. That's all that he gave me, because he wasn't really helping me. He was just trying to say something that he thought was clever and smart and wise. But I thought about that. I thought about it, and I thought the best career advice didn't come from Dr. Hufford. It didn't come from my dad. It didn't come from friends or family or anything like that. it came from an adversary. And if you really think about it, there are a lot of people out there that aren't always looking after your best interests. And sometimes they are telling you what to do. They just don't know it. They just don't know it. So I'm just telling you is that sometimes there's folks out there that they are probably giving you some kind of input or advice, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. Look at it from the context of where you're standing in relationship to who they are and what your relationship is to them, of course. So you're making healthy and smart decisions. But I would definitely say that I took that advice. I thought to myself, you know what? I really enjoyed working overseas. I liked helping people in different countries because I thought it put a brand and a name to America. I thought that I'd be carrying the flag in a way that I wasn't doing it when I was in the military. And it was going to be a more subtle way. And that way I could communicate that message of what America was really about. And so I thought to myself, I'm just going to keep deploying. I'm just going to keep going overseas, and that's what I'm going to do. And to me, in my mind, that was a great piece of advice at the end of the day.
What career advice would you offer graduate students who are just hoping to advance and further their own careers?
I would say be patient, and definitely give yourself some time, because it's going to be really hard running up that hill a lot. And what that's going to end up doing is building a lot of grit. It's going to build a lot of grit, and you're going to have to stay positive and stick at it, because you can't keep a good man or woman down. You just can't. And you keep that mental attitude of, I'm going to make it. I'm going to stay at it. And you're going to take some hits along the way. Hey, I was doing great. I was a major. I was working international relations. I had all of these. I had a book published on Amazon.com. And then finally, I reached the point where I had to accept a job in the United States where, and this is recently, this is maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. And I thought it was less than stellar. And I thought it was not as interesting, or something that prevailed upon all of my talents and experience and so forth and so on. But I learned a lot out of it. I learned a lot out of that because I stuck with it. I kept a positive attitude toward it. I was working at an ice factory, and I was like, well, how am I going to, what's interesting about an ice factory? But I learned a lot about cold chains. And after I left that job, I went to Liberia during the Ebola crisis. And one of the biggest things they needed to figure out was, how are they going to transport blood? How are they going to transport specimens from the bush, vaccines? They needed to learn something about cold chains. Guess what? Ice manufacturing company. So again, a lot of times you can't see it right there in front of you. You don't have that kind of objectivity. But if you keep that positive mental attitude and you keep at it and you say, you know what, this isn't me. I'm going to keep going at it. And you know what? If you're happy where you are, then you don't need anybody else. You don't need Carlo Niño or anybody else. That's you. That's your story. That's your book. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
So if you had the chance to start your professional career over again, what, if anything, would you do differently?
I would get out of my own way, for a fact. I keep talking about ego. I keep talking about pride. But the interesting thing about that question, I really like science fiction a lot. It's kind of a time travel question. That's assuming that if I went back in time armed with the knowledge that I have now, then of course I would make a lot of decisions differently. But then again, I wouldn't know. A lot of my best stories came out of the blunders that I made. A lot of the achievements that I have came from all of the best mistakes that I've ever made, things that I learned from. And I think that if I erased all of those mistakes and if I erased all of those blunders, I can't say that I would have learned anything from them. If it was just victory after victory, I may have just stagnated and stayed in one place. But, all of those things, became part of the mosaic of the guy that's sitting on the other end of this camera. And I'm quite happy with who he is. Hope you are too.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
Shot would just be do your best and learn to have a sense of humor and learn and know how to laugh at yourself. That's going to be really important, especially during the most darkest moments that are out there, and they're going to be a few.
Carlo,
Let me tell you, I'm just going to tell you. No, I was going to borrow one thing from Aerosmith. One of the best quotes I love from it. Hey, the light at the end of the tunnel might be you. So There you go. The end.
Carlo, thank you so much for your time and your thoughtful words and reflection on your career journey. It's inspiring to me, and I know will be inspiring to students. And St. Mary's is very proud to have you as a double alumnus.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I just want to say, I couldn't have made it this far without a large cast of colorful people to the left and right of me that couldn't be represented in front of this camera, because I definitely didn't get here on my own. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.